We're going to move on to the story around cladding because we're expecting the government to say something about it today. Now, this programme, Politics Live, has covered this story on a fairly regular basis over the last few years. And we spoke to Laura last summer, who has been affected by it. Let's listen to her tale.
We've been stuck in an area, in a flat, that is unsafe and as I said, that has a real threat of ruining our lives. You know, there is a high likelihood that we could get repossessed, that we could go bankrupt. And these are all quite dramatic phrases, but actually when you're faced with a bill of what will be at least tens of thousands of pounds, if not £100,000 for us personally as a couple, how you wake up every day worrying about it, every single day. And for me, that, and my husband, that stress has been so much worse and had a so much more negative effect on our mental health than, for example, my cancer diagnosis has, which is shocking.
I mean, a very traumatic experience for Laura and many other people. Vicky, what are we actually expecting the government to do? Because there's been talk about extra money. And how much is that likely to be? And will it sort of help everyone who is stuck in this situation?
Yeah, well, they've been under huge pressure over this. Of course, because of cases like that, you know, hundreds, thousands of people living in flats which they fear could end up, you know, going on fire, and they are feeling very much at risk. But then not just that, this is all about who pays to make it right. So there has been a fund, but it's not deemed to be anywhere near enough. Is it the property companies? Will there be some kind of levy on them to try and recoup some of the money? Now, the government, there's talk of billions of pounds that might be announced. But as you say, will it go to everybody? Will it just be for those in high-rise flats rather than those who are in low-rise flats? That's one thing. But Tory MPs, a sizable group of them, feel that actually this should cover everybody. And they have already tried to bring in an amendment to stop the property owners putting the bill onto leaseholders through service charges and that kind of thing. So they're under huge pressure to do an awful lot here to make this right.
Who should pay for this, Jake?
Well, the government. It's just really simple. I remember the appalling tragedy of Grenfell Tower. It was, in fact, my first day as a minister. I arrived in the housing department and was thrown in immediately to dealing with this just appalling human tragedy, seeing the death of so many people. Let's be absolutely clear, this is a failure of the building regulation regime. That regime was put in place by the government, in fact, a previous government in the case of Grenfell Tower. It is not the fault of the people who live in these buildings that they are a fire hazard, and the government should pay. And I might say this, during my time in the housing department, I had many battles with the Treasury, with ministerial colleagues to try and squeeze cash out of HMT. And I'm very pleased that finally the government has acknowledged that this is the right thing to do. And I absolutely support my Conservative colleagues and colleagues across the House of Commons who've been pressing for this. It's taken a very long time. Let's see what the announcement says today. But it's the right thing for the government to do.
All right, well, you're very clear in your position. We don't know, of course, exactly what the government is going to announce in terms of money, but let me just show everyone this tweet, if we can just bring it back up from Pete Apps. Until it comes up, actually, I need the word. Oh, here it is. My understanding is government set to announce funding for cladding removal work only on buildings above 18 metres. Non-cladding removal and below 18-metre blocks cost to remain with leaseholders, not yet confirmed. Would that be a mistake, Jake?
I think it would be, because, look, let's be absolutely clear about this. There are two potential people who should be held liable. Either the developer, if, in fact, the building was built outside the building regulations regime. That is a case clearly where developers or developers' insurers should pay. Or if it was built in compliance with the building regulation regime at the time the building was complete. That is a failure of government to set a proper building regulations regime, and therefore the government should pick up the tab. Whether you're in a high-rise building or a low-rise building, it is a failure of the government at the time. As it happens, it was a Labour government when many of these buildings that were done, but it is a failure of good governance of our building regulations.
All right, just before I bring our other guests in, though, Jake, just to be clear, our case study that you just heard from Laura, she was in a building of under 18 metres. So should she pay or should the government?
No, the government. I don't think I could have been clearer about my view.
Okay, fine. All right.
Where it is a failure, well, I just think it's an important distinction I'd like to make.
Yeah.
Where, it is a failure of the building regulations regime as brought in by the government, then it is clear that the government should pick up the tab. Where there are criminal activities by developers who've used the wrong type of materials, they should pay first. But if they fail to pay, it should be the government who steps in to support the leaseholders.
If the legislation doesn't include that, you'll vote against it?
Well, we'll have to wait and see what the announcement said. Well, I don't know what the announcement is going to say. I don't know if it... I doubt it is going to be the subject of legislation. I would have thought it is just the scheme that the government will bring in. Although I've been pushing since the day after Grenfell Tower, the appalling tragedy that happened there for the government to pick up the tab. I don't intend to change my tune on the issue.
OK, well,
let's wait and see what happens.
Right, well, Richard, does that satisfy you? I mean, Boris Johnson was asked about this issue by Keir Starmer at PMQs last week. He said the government was determined that no one should have to pay simply to make their homes safe. So...
Well, first of all, I think we all need to reflect upon the fact that 3.5 years since the Grenfell tragedy, there's actually hundreds of thousands of people in this country still living in blocks with unsafe cladding. So safety is the first issue. And when it comes to leaseholders and others, they shouldn't be put in a position where they're under threat of going bust because of something which certainly isn't their fault. And whatever the government announces, it'll be too late, unless they want to surprise us all. It'll be too late for those leaseholders and first-time buyers who've already gone bust because of this issue.
And do you think they will go as far as including the government, people in buildings under 18 metres and other stuff that may be flammable but is not cladding?
I don't really know. I think the problem is that the government sort of has set a fairly high expectation. I don't think they, by the way, that they'll want to get entangled in a lot of legislative time on this, because ultimately, this is just something I think everyone agrees there has to be a line drawn under it. There has to be something that comes out of it, that it's clearly a safer and also more equitable outcome. But it is interesting if you look at the advocacy of people like Peter Bottomley in the Commons, that this is something that has, I think, probably taken the government by surprise how strong the feeling is on their own side about what has been landed on leaseholders. In the end, there will be a certain pot of money that they will want to spend, and I would guess that the schemes will be drawn up to fall within that. Not everybody is going to be happy. There's not going to be full liability for every building that conceivably could be seen to fall within this, falling solely on the government. I just can't see that outcome, whether it would be the right one or not.
I mean, Vicky, do you think they are surprised by the strength of opinion? I mean, Jake is very clear about he wants to see the legislation, or not the legislation, but what the government decides to actually do. But the strength of feeling and the number of people that have been affected is huge. Yeah,
but of course you've got lots of... They probably shouldn't have been surprised by it. You have lots and lots of Conservative MPs who have constituents in this terrible position, who have been campaigning for these changes. And I think the point about how long this has all taken, it's not like this is a surprise. Everyone knew this was an issue, and I think lots of those Tory MPs would have hoped that this would have been resolved before now. There's clearly been a lot of toing and froing with the Treasury about exactly how they do this. Now, of course, if you're a minister, you are going to look to the companies, the property developers, to say, well, if you've done something wrong, then why aren't they paying up for this? Why should it be the general taxpayer? But I think that's the accommodation that they're trying to come to. And actually, if you look at the data, it's incredible that the cladding being removed and the repair work, it's been completed on only 58% of social housing blocks and 30% of private sector buildings. That's an awful lot of tenants and people sitting in places that they feel are unsafe.
Right, we're going to come back to this a little bit later, because that statement from Robert Jenrick, I think, is coming up fairly shortly after PMQs.